Team gives you a closer look at the events that happened around Maine this week.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us. I'm your host, Cindy Campbell. Today we're talking natural predators, how to protect yourself, and what to do in the case of an encounter. First, I talked with Griffin Dunn of the University of Maine Tick Lab about one of the state's tiniest threats. Griffin, how many types of ticks are there in Maine?
So we know of about 15 different species of tick that have been found here. And when I say have been found, that does mean that there are some that we have found here that haven't established long-term populations. Some are brought in on migratory birds and other wildlife and don't establish populations, whereas others are now widespread throughout much of the state.
Wow, I expected you to say like 6. That's a lot.
Yeah.
They're awake and moving now, correct?
They are. So ticks can really be active basically any time the temperature is above freezing. And once we hit the 40-degree mark, they become particularly active. So, with the relatively warm spring that we've had, ticks have been active since, the beginning of March. So certainly they are active. We're seeing really high numbers of them right now. So certainly something to be aware of and taking some personal protective measures against.
And what kinds of things can people do to protect themselves against ticks?
Yeah, since managing tick populations is so difficult, it really comes down to a couple of methods of personal protection. And one is creating a barrier in some way. And that barrier can be done through the use of protective clothing like long sleeves, long pants, tucking pant legs into socks or boots, or the barrier can be a chemical barrier through the use of repellents. There are a number of repellents that are recommended by CDC and EPA based on just how effective they are against ticks. DEET certainly is kind of the most common. And there's another one for use on clothing and gear known as permethrin that seems to be the most effective. The other tool that we really have at our disposal is something relatively simple, and that's simply conducting a tick check once we've come in from the outdoors. It's something that's really common in other parts of the country, but really not part of our culture here in Maine. We haven't really had to deal with ticks for very long, so we really have to make this cultural shift to really get in the habit of looking for ticks and checking ourselves and our pets and our kids closely when they've been outdoors.
And I like to go into some places where you might want to know someone well so they can help you look.
Yeah, so once the tick is on the body, it can move around quite a bit. Other times it'll just kind of stop at the first exposed skin that it comes across and start feeding. But oftentimes they will kind of aggregate in these areas that are a little bit more protected. Oftentimes it's in the hairline, the scalp. Other times it can be armpits, groin, kind of areas where they're a little bit tucked away and protected.
Okay. Some ticks carry disease, Lyme being the most well-known. Which ticks carry Lyme disease?
So here in the state of Maine, the black-legged tick, or deer tick as it's commonly known, is responsible for transmitting Lyme disease and the other pathogens that do occur here. There are a number of other tick species that can transmit pathogens. Some of them are very host-specific, meaning that they feed on only a certain type of wildlife primarily, and we don't really see them on people. Other tick species that we have here that can transmit disease, the diseases simply haven't been found here yet. So the dog tick is a good example of this. The dog tick is very common in Maine. We see them very frequently biting people and pets, and they can transmit a number of pathogens in other parts of the country. Those pathogens have not yet been found here in the state of Maine. It's something we're certainly monitoring and looking for to see when and if they do occur here, but that species currently is more of a nuisance species than a real public health threat.
Okay. How long does a deer tick have to be embedded before it transmits Lyme disease? Is that an immediate thing?
So with the length of feeding for transmission of Lyme disease and some of the other pathogens, it's really more of a risk curve. A lot of people think of it as this kind of light switch or black and white time limit where, the 24-hour mark is often thrown around and they often will think that, prior to 24 hours, there's no risk of transmission, and after 24 hours, it's guaranteed. And it's really more of this risk curve where, at 2 or 3 hours of feeding, the risk isn't zero, but it's really relatively low. Once you hit that 24-hour mark, the risk of disease transmission increases greatly, and once you hit the 48-hour, 72 hour, the risk really goes up. So it's not so much a matter of, a black and white time limit. It's kind of the more broad, the longer the tick has attached, the higher the risk.
Okay. Being bit by a deer tick, does that automatically mean you have Lyme? Do they all carry it, or is it just some?
So not all deer ticks or black-legged ticks carry Lyme disease. They actually have to pick it up from feeding on an infected host, and that goes for several of the other pathogens that are common here in Maine as well. So it's not that all of them are infected. They have to, as I said, feed on infected, mouse or other rodent species, sometimes bird species. So that means not all of them will be infected. As of right now, in the testing that we've been conducting over the past few years, it appears around 40% of deer ticks here in the state of Maine are testing positive for the pathogen that causes Lyme disease. Some of our other pathogens like anaplasmosis and babesiosis that are becoming more common, we're seeing about 6 or 7% of the deer ticks testing positive for those pathogens.
Which is actually pretty low. I mean, for the amount of Lyme disease there seems to be in the state, that's a pretty low percentage.
Yes, and so those numbers, so the percentages that I mentioned are kind of the statewide averages, and we do see kind of localized fluctuations in that. Some areas we could see, upwards of 70 or 80% of the ticks testing positive. In other places, it's much lower and only 5 or 10% are testing positive. So it really can vary by location in the state, as well as from year to year, we see some fluctuations.
Okay. So someone finds a tick and pulls it off. They don't know what kind of tick it is. That's where the Maine Tick Lab comes in, correct?
Yeah, so here at the Humane Tick Lab, we offer a couple of services that people can take advantage of. If they've found a tick on themselves, they can send it in for a free species identification where we'll tell them exactly what type of tick it is that they're dealing with. And then for a nominal fee, $15, they can actually have that tick tested for a number of the pathogens that do occur here.
How does someone send you a tick?
So to send a tick in for identification or testing, we have an online submission form that can be completed at our website, ticks.humane.edu. Once they've completed the submission form, it's a relatively simple mailing process. All we ask is that the tick be put in a Ziploc bag, and then it can simply be put in an envelope and mailed to our lab here in Orono.
Finally, I wanted to mention that people are not the only ones susceptible, correct? Your pets can also get Lyme disease.
Yeah, just like us, pets, dogs in particular, are susceptible to Lyme disease and other tick-borne pathogens. So certainly working with your veterinarian on appropriate preventative measures, whether it be, tick collars or medications that can help prevent tick bites, are important. There's vaccines for dogs against Lyme disease. So really working with your veterinarian to protect your pets is critical here in Maine.
I would encourage everyone to go to your website because you have a lot of information there, including pictures of all the different kinds of ticks.
Yeah, so we do have a nice photo gallery. We have information on all of the tick species that have been found here in the state of Maine thus far. So certainly we encourage anyone to check out the website if they're curious about ticks, if they're curious about learning about some of the measures that they can take to prevent encountering ticks.
Find more information at ticks.humane.edu. Next, I talked with bear biologist Jen Vachon about the impact our early spring is having on hibernation and how to avoid bringing black bears onto your property. Jen, everything seems to be early this year. The warm weather, the bugs are coming out. Are bears waking up early this year?
I believe some of them did. We often see bears coming out even earlier when we have like a spring rain.
All right. How long typically do black bears hibernate?
So typically they enter around November 1st and emerge sometime around April 1st. Some years they go in as early as October 1st and some years as late as December 1st. And it's natural foods that determine when bears enter the den.
Okay.
So when there's a lot of natural foods out on the landscape, they're going to stay out longer foraging on those. And when there's not a lot of food for them, they're going to go into the den early.
Okay. And of course, waking up after that long sleep, they're hungry this time of year. I wanted to run down just some ways that people can avoid attracting them to their property, starting with bird feeders. They really love bird feeders, don't they?
They do, especially the sunflower seeds. This time of year, we recommend that people rake up seed from the ground and store their bird feeders inside. So when you're doing your yard work, just add that to your list of things to do.
Okay. And that's take them inside and leave them inside. That's not just take them inside at night, right?
Right. Ideally, that's what we prefer, is that people bring their feeders in this time of year, particularly if you live in bear country or if you've experienced problems with bears in the past. But we know a lot of people really enjoy watching birds and feeding birds. So one thing they can do is consider planting different shrubs that will provide food for birds and not attract bears to their backyard.
Okay. Are bears attracted by smelly trash?
Yes, they are. Just like any wild animal that, raccoons, skunks, possums, black bears are attracted to garbage. For those people that have a dumpster as their means for storing their garbage, there's several things you can do to prevent bear problems. One of them is make sure you close the door and the lids after you've placed your garbage in the dumpster. If you're having bear problems, work with your trash disposal company. You can get a locking bar on the lid that can make it harder for a bear to get access. Also, if your trash is overflowing, contact your trash disposal company and have them come more frequently to avoid having something that attracts a bear to that dumpster. Some people have trash pickup at their curb.
Right.
So if you're an individual that has curbside pickup for your trash, one thing we recommend this time of year is bringing your garbage to the curb the morning of pickup. Anybody that has experienced problems with wildlife know if you bring your trash to the curb the night before, you'll often find it strewn across the lawn the next morning.
Right.
And so that's one of the easiest things you can do. It's a little inconvenient, but bring your trash to the curb on the morning of trash pickup. So this time of year, we ask people again, if you're storing your garbage cans outside, like on a porch or a deck, bring them inside, particularly if you have an outbuilding. That's a good place to bring them. But make sure that your windows and doors on outbuildings work properly, and if not, repair those windows and doors.
Yeah.
Because a bear could easily get into a building if the doors don't fully close.
They're crafty, man. They can get in. If it's not secured tight, man, they'll find a way in.
For sure.
Same thing with barbecue grills?
Yes. So this time of year, everybody's getting excited to be grilling. So there's a couple things you can do to make it less attractive to bears. Make sure you clean up the area that you've grilled. All your food wrappers are put in the trash and inside. You clean your grill after use, and if you can, store it inside.
Now, I know when I read this, it had never even occurred to me, but if you have pet food outside, if you put like a dish of food out for the dog, that will pull them in too.
Yes. Yeah, and the same goes with livestock feed. So if you have pets or livestock, think about where you store your feed. If you're feeding them outside, consider feeding them inside. And if you have to feed pets or livestock outside, give them only what they need to eat, and then clean up any uneaten food.
Okay. I know a lot of people right now are big on yard chickens. My neighbors have yard chickens. Is that something that will bring bears in? Are they attracted to chickens?
They are, not only the chickens, but again, the feed. So the best thing to do with having poultry in your backyard is to consider fencing. There's a lease program with USDA Wildlife Services, so you can lease a fence. Okay. And then you can also purchase them, at your local feed supply store.
Right. Okay. Something I hadn't thought of before, but compost piles, is that something that will pull bears in?
Yeah, and so one of the things that we recommend the most about composting, and a lot of people do this already, is avoid meat scrap. And then if you are in an area that has experienced bear problems in the past, consider not composting this time of year, or at least securing that compost.
Okay.
Electric fence is a great deterrent, and it has a lot of different utilities. So you can put electric fence around garbage cans that if you don't have a place that you can store them inside, you can use them for poultry, and you can even use them around a compost pile.
Okay. Is there a particular time of day when black bears tend to prowl for food, or are they just kind of on the hunt all the time?
That's a really good question. A lot of people think that if they enjoy feeding birds, that they can just bring their feeders in at night and they can avoid having bear problems because bears are active only during the night. But I have many more pictures of bears at bird feeders during the day than I do ever at night. And so that is one of the reasons why we recommend, people bring in their feeders. But for those that are maybe not experiencing bear problems, but they want to be cautious about attracting a bear,
right,
they can at the very least, bring their feeders in at night and rake up any seed off the ground. And then if they start seeing bears in the area, stop feeding birds.
Okay. This is my fear. I come to work early in the morning before dawn for most of the year. What should a person do if they walk out of the house and, hey, there's a bear in their yard? What do they do?
Yes, that's a really good question. So that's almost like a surprise encounter, right? You get up in the morning, it's still dark outside. The best thing you can do, of course, is turn on any outdoor lights before you go outside and check around, particularly if you're experiencing bears in your neighborhood so you know they're around. Just be cautious. Just look before you go outside. If you do surprise a bear, normally they're going to run off. But if you surprise them and they're cornered, the best thing you can do is just back away.
Slowly, I would think. Don't run.
Yeah, don't run, but just slowly back away. And just like anything, they're looking for that escape route, and they might come running towards you if they see like a place where they can escape, but they're going to, as long as you back out of the area, they usually are going to move out of there as soon as you leave the area.
Okay. What about, I've heard people talk about if you want a bear out of your yard, bang pots and pans and make a lot of noise. Is that something you can do too?
Yes. So that's another thing we recommend. So if, say you're inside and you look outside, you turn on your lights and you see a bear in your backyard getting into garbage or bird feeders or just walking through, just make a lot of noise. You can shout, bang pots and pans together, and the bears usually will run off.
Okay. I think we covered this with the backing out, but if we were talking about bears, if your shed door is not closed well, can get in there. What if you walk in and there's a bear? Do you back out?
Yes, same idea. So that's just another example of where you have the potential to surprise the bear and corner it. And so what you want to think about is backing out and providing the bear an escape route.
All right.
So I was just trying to think if there was some other things that we didn't cover. So most of our bear complaints occur between the months of May and July. They start in April, but they peak in May, June, and July.
Okay.
So that's a period of time where people need to be extra vigilant, is during those 3 months. But we recommend during the time period where bears are active, not denning, that's April 1 to November 1, that they consider whether or not they have attractants in their backyard and what they can do to secure them.
I have to share a story with you about a lady I saw on social media last year who had put bird feeders out and had a bear come in her yard, take her feeders down, and she was very upset. And the very next day posted again, he came back again. And the reaction from people was, you put the feeders back out? If it's like a restaurant, if they know you have a food supply and you keep putting it out, they're going to keep coming back.
Yeah, I had a similar story where I got a call from a woman that had been bringing in everything every night. Like one night it was bird feeders, and the next night she recognized it was getting into the garbage. And so she's like, I've done everything. And she was talking about everything she did. And as she was on the phone saying, I brought in my bird feeder. And then the next day it came in and I brought in my garbage cans. And then she's like, oh, I've got a cooler outside with bread stored in it. And so like she solved her own problem while she was talking to me, thinking about what might be attracting a bear. And so that's really good. Like if people just start thinking about what in my backyard might attract a bear and what can I do to make sure it's not there.
Yeah. And if you have an attractant, they will come back. Don't assume they're going to move along after they eat from your feeders.
And I think another good point around that, too, is if you do everything to keep your yard unattractive to a bear, but your neighbors are still feeding birds or storing their garbage outside, then a bear is likely to still wander through. So it's a community effort. Everybody needs to be following those recommendations. And as an agency, we have signs and brochures available. So if there's a community that's experiencing problems, we can post signs so people know what to do.
Find more information at mefishwildlife.com/livingwithblackbears and at bearsmart.com. I'm Cindy Campbell. Thanks again for joining us, and stay healthy.
Join us again next weekend for Maine Concerns with your Town Square Media News team.